Hi Helen, welcome along to the Tin Shed today. And I see you've got a book here called Plant Me Instead that you're going to tell us about. Can you just give us a brief about yourself and your background with plants?
My name's Helen Braithwaite. I work for the Department of Conservation and I've been working in the field of weeds for some time. And one of the things I'm really passionate about is convincing people that it's a good idea to do something about weeds, not to expect the council, for example, to sort it out for them. So I've become part of the Weedbusters organisation.
Okay, and what's Weedbusters organisation?
Weedbusters is a weed awareness and education programme that aims to protect New Zealand's environment from the threats of invasive weeds. It involves Department of Conservation, who I work for, regional councils, MAF, Biosecurity New Zealand, the nursery and garden industry, and federated farmers.
So what's the idea behind this book, Plant Me Instead?
Okay. Working with weeds, people often say we're really negative, telling them what they shouldn't have.
Heavenly gardens?
Yeah. When faced with taking out weedy species, it's a really good idea to have something to put in its place so the weeds can't come back. And you need to be a bit careful that you're not going to put in something that's equally weedy, because you just get another problem.
Later on for people, isn't it?
The first Plant Me Insteads were produced in Northland and Auckland and then in Wellington, and they were really successful, but they cover a range of different species that we don't have, like down here in Canterbury. So the Weedbuster organisation decided to coordinate several additional Plant Me Instead booklets for other parts of New Zealand, and that helped cut down on the costs and gave us a look that's similar for lots of regions. The Plant Me Insteads include both suitable native and exotic species that are reasonably easy to find.
So tell me, how did you go about choosing what plants are in the Plant Me Instead? I see you've got a range of things, from aluminium plant, which is, I've seen that around quite a lot, quite frequently, and then you've got a native alternative and just introduced. What made them decide to do both rather than just pushing the native side of things?
There are a lot of plants in New Zealand that are not a problem at all, that have been brought into the country, and only a small proportion have actually naturalised into the wild. And of those, only a few hundred are really weedy. And there are a lot of exotic plants that will never become weeds. When we're working with restoration groups, obviously we want them to get the right eco-source native species. But if you're talking about a home garden, there's absolutely nothing wrong with lots of really beautiful plants that are available freely in garden centres.
So as a gardener, for these particular plants, how come some of the plants have made it into this book and other ones haven't? What was the process about deciding what plants were going to be in for the Canterbury and Otago region?
Right, well we got together and with the people in Otago and decided that we had quite a range of similar weeds and similar species that we could grow and we got a range of different climates from the coast through to the high country. So we worked together. And what we did was we got people who were responsible for looking after parks and reserves for local councils, regional councils, other organisations, and asked them what were the worst weeds as far as invading parks and causing problems, and looking at the species that might possibly go out of gardens into parks. So that's how we came up with a list, and everybody put their lists in, and we made up a list from averaging them out, basically. And once we'd done that, we then got a group of experts together and consulted other people. So we had botanists and people in the nursery industry to advise us what were suitable alternatives to replace the weeds with, and what we could actually recommend to people that they could buy in garden centres, because we didn't want to put obscure species that they couldn't find anywhere. And then we put the list of alternatives through every check we could find. We looked at all the lists of weeds in New Zealand. We looked at all the weeds of overseas as well, just to make sure that the species we were looking at didn't have weedy tendencies anywhere.
You know, I see you've got some plants here. What have you brought in for us to have a look at today?
Oops. Well, the first one here is sycamore, and that was actually the top of a lot of people who contributed to the list, the top of their list. It's a tree. It's quite distinctive leaves and red stems, relatively easy to distinguish.
And what's the key thing that conservation groups were having issues with sycamore? What is it about sycamore that's...
Sycamore is incredibly hardy. It can survive in dry conditions, wet conditions. It can survive in quite dense shade, and it forms really, really dense areas once it manages to get established, and basically shades out all other vegetation. It's also not particularly easy to kill. You can't just chop it down because it just produces suckers from the root system. So once it's established, it's really difficult to get hold of. But it is the sort of thing that you see in gardens and along roadsides. There's a fair bit of it around in Canterbury.
And are they still selling sycamore, do you know, or is that...
It's certainly not banned from sale.
And is it one of the feature plants in the Canterbury and Otago booklet?
It is, yes.
Yeah. And what I was just wondering what the suggestions would be for the alternatives.
So one of the things we're suggesting people could use as a replacement, if they're looking for a really nice tree to be established in their garden, are the beeches. This is a red beech, which tends to like a bit of moisture, so you pick the beech that's right for where you are and that likes the conditions. But this is obviously not going to grow anywhere nearly as quick as sycamore. So it'll take a long time before that to be a sizable established tree, but it's worth the effort. However, something like the ribbonwood here, which that's just a young tree there, that grows pretty quickly, and it's also deciduous in the same way that sycamore is, and it's got really attractive flowers. So if you want something that will get there a bit quicker, I grow with the ribbonwood. Another one I have here.
Oh, this looks very familiar. I see this growing along water races quite frequently.
Yes. This is a particular fine specimen. It's very large. It has these orange flowers, and when the flowers are finished, it's you can see the stem's got quite a distinctive zigzag. One of the interesting things about the Montbretia is the corms. So they form clumps of corms, and the corms then split and divide, and you get more and more plants. And you can see that one's starting to form a new shoot there.
And what is it about Montbretia that it made it into the Plant Me Instead book?
That can form very, very dense stands. You just see a sea of Montbretia, and it particularly sort of on waterways, it can shade out smaller vegetation and just become a huge mass. Yeah.
And have you got alternatives?
Well, there are some really lovely native alternatives for Montbretia. For this talk, I'm mostly concentrating on the natives because we're talking about restoration. This one here, Daniela nigra, it is absolutely beautiful. You can see it's an attractive looking small.
It's got a similar leafy texture as well to the Montbretier.
Yeah, and it has absolutely gorgeous blue berries. You can see the flower stem there where the berries will be, or will have been, and they sort of start up a dark but very bright blue and then fade to a sort of pale blue. Really a very attractive plant, that one. Again, that would thrive along a stream side. It's a really nice plant for that sort of location. This is the Lubertia, which is another plant of a similar form, and this one has white flowers and orange berries.
So that one's native as well?
Yes.
So what's this one number you've got here?
That's another native alternative for Montbretier, and that's the Astelia, which has beautiful, it's an Astelia fragrans, so it's got lovely white flowers with a beautiful scent in spring, and again that has orange berries later in the season, but only on the female plant. I just mentioned that the big problem with Montbretier, as far as it's spreading, is it will spread in the area by the corms dividing, but if people remove it and any fragments of the corms get elsewhere, they can spread. Just a small fragment of the corm can grow into a new plant, so that's another reason why we're particularly concerned about that one.
And what are these other plants you've got here? That looks like a climber.
Yep.
What would that be suitable for?
Well, one of the other species that there's a lot of concern about, and it's not particularly easy to deal with, is ivy.
Ivy.
Okay, so
I've had quite a bit to do with ivy in my own garden. It's quite a nuisance.
somewhere in there I had a flower. Oh, yeah. So ivy can come in quite a lot of different sizes and leaf shapes. You get variegated ivy quite often as well. And here, got the flower. So you'll see it in flower this time of the year. Although mainly it spreads from fragments rather than from the actual seeds. And you can look underneath, you see all the little aerial rootlets. They're the bits that grab onto
buildings.
Walls, trees, clotheslines, anything it can climb up to get towards the sun on. And it's a really successful plant. And with having these aerial roots, that helps it. So if you cut the bottom of it, this bit will still stay alive. So it's really difficult to get rid of. And it's another weed that really you have to be persistent with. You can't necessarily just get rid of it in one shot, because there'll be little fragments that get away. And again, a small fragment of this can easily spread elsewhere. So people might get rid of it from their garden, and if they don't dispose of it really carefully, then the chances are it'll escape somewhere else.
So if you do have an issue plant like this in your garden and you want to dispose of it wisely, what do you suggest is the best method?
Well, for some plants like the Montbretier, you just make sure that the bottom part was put in your normal rubbish and the top part can go in your green waste. Just remove the flowers as well. It depends really on how your waste's dealt with. If you've got really good recycling centre that treats green waste at high temperature for a long time, then you can actually put most things in there because the heat will kill them. But if your waste system is a little bit less technical, then you've got to think about putting things like roots and seed heads in the garden, in the household waste rather than garden waste. Anyway, I'll just go back to the alternatives for the ivy. Now, there are some really attractive New Zealand native clematises. This got a little bit bashed in its trip here, but that's Clematis paniculata, which is the one with the huge, beautiful white flowers that you see on the hillsides in a good season. So there's that one and several other clematises. This looks a bit sad at the moment, but this is the native jasmine, the parsantia, and that's only got its juvenile leaves on at the moment. But once it grows, it's really attractive, and it's got some lovely sweet-smelling flowers. With both the clematises and the jasmine, you just need to look after them a bit at first when you first get them established. They tend to like their roots to be somewhere cool and shaded and wet, but then the plant will climb up into the sunlight. So if you can give them that environment for a year or so, they'll quickly become established, and then they'll start spreading and looking absolutely amazing.
And so are these evergreens, or are they deciduous?
The clematises will shed their leaves, but the jasmine is not deciduous.
So for those people that are interested, whereabouts can you get these Plant Me Instead booklets?
Well, the Canterbury and Otago Plant Me Insteads can be obtained from DOC offices, from regional councils, both ECAN and Otago Regional Council, and from some district councils. Some district councils have bought supplies of these to give out to ratepayers. Nationally, Plant Me Instead is available for Waikato, Southland, Nelson Marlborough, and people can get those free of charge by to an email address, which is info@weedbusters.org.nz. Weedbusters are also working on Plant Me Insteads for the Bay of Plenty and for East Cape Hawke's Bay.
That's great for those areas, and they have something to look forward to too. Thanks, Helen. That's great.